What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shape their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community, I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Joanna Riley, CEO and co-founder of Censia, a platform built to transform the way companies hire talent. Joanna was named one of the 100 highest-ranking women in technology, and she is an active member of the entrepreneurship community as both an early-stage investor and recent chapter chair of YPO San Francisco Bay. Early in her career, she was part of the International Training Unit for the FBI, where she applied the lessons she learned rowing for the University of Virginia. Today, she is part of the President's Program at Harvard Business School, where she is receiving her MBA. I'm so excited for her to share her wisdom with us today.
I remember one time I put up two backgrounds. One was dropout, traveled the world, was an artist. And then another one that went to Harvard, had worked at all these big banks, and I made them raise their hand if they would hire, who they'd hire. And very few people hired the first guy. And the first guy was Steve Jobs, and the second guy was Bernie Madoff.
Joe, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
You know, our mutual friend, Mary Baker, who just raves about all that you're going to teach us today. No pressure, no pressure. She shared your story with us. Lots of value coming to our listeners from your experience, both corporately and in the sport of rowing. We've had a few rowers on, and I just love all that we can learn from that sport. But first, I wanted to take you back to a study that you did. Took you to 110 countries, is the way I understand it. And you asked executives from all of those different cultures 3 questions.
Yes, I had wonderful parents. And my dad always said to me, if you want to understand something about somewhere in the world, you have to go there and you have to ask questions to people on the ground. You can't just read it in a book or watch it in a movie. You have to go and understand it. Maybe if I start this journey, I'm going to start to hear a consistent theme across all these different executives, all these different cultures, because I want to solve a global problem. And what was nuts is I went, as you said, to over 100 countries. I talked to over 1,000 executives, and I asked them 3 things. What's your greatest asset? What's your biggest challenge? And what are you afraid of? Everyone's afraid of something, especially a CEO. And there's so much happening in the world. And I thought people would talk about whether it be the next greatest robotic thing that is their asset, or their great, IP, or whatever they would talk about as their asset. But what was crazy is that across all 3 of those questions, there was a theme around people. Most of these executives would say their greatest asset is their people. Their greatest challenge is finding good people. And their biggest fear is that if they cannot find people that are good enough to help them go through this digital transformation that we're in the world, they actually wouldn't survive as a company. I have to say that was well over 75, 80% of people said the same thing. And that was the problem that got me the most excited. It's really what inspired me to go into HR technology and do the digging to understand why whatever was out there today didn't work. That's really what helped me launch Censia and really get focused on how can we transform the way that companies hire the best talent in the world. And what I came through across these themes was that there were actually over 1 billion people in the world that qualified for jobs that were being discriminated against for those jobs because they didn't have the right keywords on their profiles, or they didn't go to the right schools, or they didn't work at the right Fortune 500 companies. But they were so incredibly capable and so enormously successful in what they'd done in their career. How could we help showcase those 1 billion people around the world to be seen for jobs they qualify for, and really do that based on performance and their track record?
So that's an amazing number.
Crazy.
A billion people in the world who qualify for jobs that they're not currently employed in. And the reason could be as something as simple as not having the right keyword in their resume.
Yep. I ask this to CEOs all the time. I'll look up somebody's LinkedIn and go, what's your number one skill or what's your top skills? I said this the other day to a CEO of a public company that's $20 billion market cap. Do you know what your top skill is? I don't know. Probably investor relations. And I was like, no, it's startups. You know what's not on your profile? IPO, fundraising, investor relations. These things that are really fundamental to this individual were not at all being represented. You'd have to have the human understanding that this individual works at this company, he's done this, it's at this market cap, it's made this much revenue, to really understand that this individual himself has taken that company through it. And we see that across the board. It is really their own work experience combined with what experience occurred in the company while they were there. Did that company go through hypergrowth? Did it release new product? Did it go into emerging markets or expand internationally? And they were part of that expansion. That's really important experience to understand about a person. That was really what we focused on changing. How did we search for people and understand people with the context of their track record insights and the experiences that they've had as a combined themselves and their company to really see how skilled they were and how good they were. And it's just been amazing. We work with some of the best companies in the world, and I couldn't be more honored to be able to see them hire great talent that just doesn't look the same. They all look different and they're all better at what they do. It's exciting.
I love it. So in this 100-country interview set, was there an aha moment for you, a moment when it just really came home to you? Oh, I can't believe this. This is my global problem.
I had an opportunity once. It was a very rare opportunity. I was with a number of presidents of countries, prime ministers, and CEOs. I went on this journey of asking them questions, and I really wanted to understand why these individuals choose to take this on. Some of them had been thrown in jail, some of them had the world against them and for them in all different stages. There was a theme that came across that they had been inspired by individuals in their life that had faced extreme hardship and they had overcome that hardship. That had truly inspired them to be successful. And that could be a female in a village went on to go from the least educated to the most educated to teaching the village kids how to be in school, or they were an outcast and they had come back and fought for the opportunity to own a business, even though they were banished from that. Whatever the story was, it was something that was so extreme. And then they had overcome that and come back. And I understood that that was something that not only made people great, but it inspired even bigger greatness. It inspired leaders of countries. And these stories were stories that might be small in someone's mind, or it might be a small story. If I told it to you, you'd be like, well, why is that a big deal? Not you, because you understand this, but people might listen and they go, oh, why is that a big deal? In the end, what was shocking is that was the biggest indicator. And so it was these people's stories and these people's experiences that not only had allowed them to be so successful, but inspired great success. And I felt like if we could start to highlight that in people, that would really be the game changer. And that was kind of the big aha moment. I remember that. And I still get goosebumps telling you that story because it's the moment I was, oh, this is a big one.
What you're identifying here is the importance of storytelling in business.
Yeah.
We can have the greatest idea on the planet, but if we can't tell it to others through story, then we might not be able to pull them along with us. It's the art of being able to tell a good story.
Yeah.
It changes the dynamic and the opportunity for everyone. And not always our story, sometimes the story of those who inspire us.
Yep. I remember one time I did a presentation. I didn't talk about who, and I put up two backgrounds. And one was dropout, traveled the world, was an artist. And then another one that went to Harvard, had worked at all these big banks, and I made them raise their hand if they would hire, who they'd hire. And very few people hired the first guy. And the first guy was Steve Jobs, and the second guy was Bernie Madoff. They're like, oh my gosh. We're at a wonderful moment here in 2022 where we're seeing technologies like ours and like others that understand that to find people and understand them in this holistic way, we need to start to structure the information about these people. Behind every technology, What we learned was that there's a very dirty data set. And when you're trying to add AI on top of it and find patterns, it's impossible to do that if there's 100 different ways to say the number one. An algorithm is just a math equation. If you're trying to find someone that has B2B sales experience, they might call that enterprise sales experience. They might call that corporate sales experience. They might call that business to business experience. There's lots of different ways to say the same experience using a human to try and come up with all the different ways. The data, unfortunately, is too varied. It's too unstructured to do that on some of the legacy kind of archaic platforms that are keyword based. But to really be starting to look at talent based on these track record insights, to be looking at talent instead of trying to define them based on what schools they go to or what keywords they have on their profiles or what companies they worked at, instead starting to look at talent based on really where the company's trying to go in the next 2 years and say, who has pulled that off before? Because that's what I want to hire and that's what I want to bring in. And what the organization will find and that CEO will find is that that talent's much more qualified. They stay a lot longer and they are also going to make the biggest impact in the organization. And sure enough, a lot of cases, much faster to hire because they're not the ones that everybody's going after. They look different, they act different, and yet being able to search that way and be able to look at talent based on success metrics is really the key driver.
If we become too overly dependent on AI driven models to tell us this is who really will fit within our organization, if we don't really do the work to dig beyond the numbers, we're going to miss out on real talent.
Yeah. People get scared of AI, and there's a lot of bad cases of AI when it comes down to the application of talent. There's a lot of cases of this. An organization takes all the people they've hired in the past and all the people that have gotten into the final interview, and they go, okay, what's the pattern? What's the common denominator?
Right.
You're going to find, unfortunately, this talent all looks the same and they all kind of act the same. They all come from the same places because the filtering has been done based on humans. But if you take a really, really large data set that is unbiased, that is clean, that has no attributing factors to gender, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, disability status, that is able to understand this skill equals that skill. This company owns these companies. This is the performance that is attached to this individual. AI that is really being built around structuring that information and looking at patterns on structured data. When it comes down to talent, those companies make a huge difference in these organizations. So digging deep and saying, we're not just going to keep using technology that isn't making that investment, but instead let's make investments into using technology and using applications that are much more accurate.
That's awesome.
You mentioned earlier I was a rower. I still think of myself as a rower. Unfortunately, a really bad career-ending injury. Rowing is not the sport you start with. Your parents always try like the normal sports first, right? They're like, okay, we're going to do running. We're going to do softball. We're going to do soccer. We're going to do, okay, maybe it's swimming. Let's now verge into the horseback riding and the ice skating. Okay, that's not your sports either. I mean, rock climbing is before rowing.
Only in spelling.
Yeah. But I was from California and rowing wasn't a huge part. There are parts of California that have wonderful rowing programs, but I was born in San Francisco and we live on the bay. And my parents, they knew I had a great athlete in me and I just hadn't found my thing yet. Never judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. I think about this a lot when hiring people, and I think about this when meeting people as a wonderful way of thinking, in that they knew I had this drive and this unbelievable kind of determination about me, that I was completely performance based, yet I just hadn't found my sport. And they always told me, whatever you do, go in 100%. Because if you go all in and you realize this isn't my thing, at least you tried fully.
Right.
By the time I picked up an oar, that sure enough was my sport. And I was at the time one of the best in the sport. And it was an unbelievable honor to go through that experience and understand that it isn't about not being a great athlete. It's that I wasn't in my sport yet. And also, a company is only as great as its team. I'm by far the least impressive of my team. My team is unbelievable. Find people that are better than me and get out of their way, and I'll always be successful. If I look for people that have their equivalent of rowing, I'll always be successful.
It wasn't that I wasn't a good enough athlete. I just hadn't found my sport.
Yep.
That's so encouraging to everybody. Keep looking, keep trying. And that's just as true professionally.
Don't quit.
You're 14 when you start.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how rowing becomes your thing.
So I didn't know what rowing was. I was walking through a boarding school fair. My parents had gone to boarding school, so I kind of didn't love this idea, but I was like, I'll just go to the fair. A guy grabbed my arm and he goes, "Are you interested in crew?" And I was like, "What is crew?" Like that kind of led this journey. And sure enough, I ended up going to boarding school in Connecticut. And I went to Kent, which is an incredible school, especially for rowing and especially for helping kids to find what they're great at, not just athletically, but academically or in drama or whatever their thing is. They really help guide that. So by the time they go to college, they're able to really hone into it. When you first try out for rowing, it's hard to try out on the water. I rowed in eights. So there's 7 other girls and a coxswain that could kind of influence a person's success. And so what they want to understand is how fast are you able to complete a certain meter distance? At the time, I was young enough that the meter distance was 1,500 meters. And they basically set what's called an ergometer, which we've all seen in gyms. I like to call them torture devices, but they are a rowing machine. And as I continued on in my career, it moved to 2,000 meters. And you have to row at the fastest. And it's the sheer play on strength. And then going into college, they do what's called weighting average. They make sure that it's based on strength versus just if you're bigger, you're going to be able to pull an erg and have a higher score. So they weight average that. And sure enough, the first time I did it, I kind of was like, oh, I don't know, I'll just go through this. And I did better than all the other girls on the team, including the varsity team. And the coach was like, who is this freshman who doesn't even know what rowing is? And I kind of was like, was this good? I didn't really understand it, but I had at the time the best erg score of the girls. And it was that year I was asked to join junior nationals. And at that point, it was 2,000 meters. And I kind of walked in being like, I'm awesome. I'm going to do this great. And I show up and I was not awesome. And now I was with the best of the best. And I had this wonderful coach who's still a great friend of mine today. And she was the Olympic coxswain prior. And what they do is they invite 8 boats of girls and then they cut the bottom 6 and the top 2 go and race for the rest of the summer. Within about 2 weeks into this, I was in the 6th 8, which meant I was definitely getting cut. So I was not the best at all. And we were practicing roughly 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day. And one time we're in the boat rowing in the Ohio River, which is a really tough river to row because you go really fast with current and going back is really, really hard. It takes hours. 20 minutes to get to where you need to turn around and then spend the next 3 hours rowing back. I was sitting 7th seat and she says 7 and 8 drop out. We have to sit there and hold our oars. And my hands were bleeding. Everyone's hands were bleeding. We're exhausted. And now the other 6 girls have to carry us back to the boathouse, which is hard enough. We get to the dock and she goes, do you know why I dropped 7 and 8 out? And the girls are like, oh, why? And she goes, I could not stand watching Joe Riley row for one more second. I was 14 years old. I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. We get up and she goes, Joe, come here. I'm 5'10". I'm pretty tall. Coxswains are short. So she's like here on me. And I'm looking down at her. I'm like, if I blinked, I would be crying, but there's no crying and rowing. And she goes, you know what your problem is? That team believes in you. That assistant coach, she believes in you. I believe in you. You don't believe in you. Mm. I was spending a lot of time when the team wasn't in practice, practicing on my own. So she knew I had the athletic ability. And I think what I had kind of forgotten is that it's as much a mental game as it is an athletic game. Actually, in rowing, it's much more a mental game than it is an athletic game. But I had the athletic ability, just like building a company. A lot of us, we have the intelligence to do it. We have the vision. There is always a struggle between to be truly successful and what comes with being so successful. And yet the fear of failure and the fear of success are the two kind of wonderful plays that you kind of have to ask yourself, are you really afraid of failure? Are you afraid of success? I was afraid of admitting that I could be successful, that I could be the best. I was focused so much on each individual stroke, I would fail to look at the outcome and win. I learned in that moment that my great coaches, and to this day, my great investors, are those that are so aligned. My team is built with this unbelievable alignment of we are all going in the same direction. We are all rowing in sync. I am their leader, and each of them have their own seats, and none of them can really do another seat. And that together as a unit, we are one. That is a very powerful thing to understand. You're not alone. And in that moment, I wasn't alone. I understood in that very moment that actually everyone around me knows I can do it. And it was almost the permission for myself to believe that I could do it. It clicked. It wasn't a matter of lifting more weights or doing practice outside. It was actually a matter of just closing my eyes and seeing the win. And from that day forward, I've never lost a seat race in my career up until when I had to retire. Believing in myself was one of the greatest and most important things in my career. And it's still the most important thing. And I think in any entrepreneur's career is believing in themselves and not letting the saboteurs, as they've sometimes been called, come in and influence where you're going and what you're doing. That was one of the greatest moments in my life. And I was lucky enough to be 14 years old when I learned it.
Has there been a young Joe in your business career that you have walked up and kind of had some similar instruction to, kind of encouraging them to believe in themselves?
Oh, yes. I mean, gosh, they're way better than me. I look at even the young rowers today and I'm just like, they're beating me left and right. They're unbelievable. I love young entrepreneurs. I love to see that hunger. And I guest lecture at University of Virginia because I went to University of Virginia and I speak at their entrepreneurial course. And sometimes they'll reach out to me, I want to tell you what I'm working on. And these are kids in school, right? They're still in college. I was nowhere close to this. And they give me these ideas. They're like, oh, do you have any questions? And I'm like, yeah, can I give you money in this? Like, can I become an investor? Like, that's my one question. Like, how did you think of all this? And they're so put together and they've crowdsourced knowledge from entrepreneurs and lessons learned. And I think that is a really big indicator. And then that they have the passion and the guts to break through all the walls that are going to be in front of them, because everything, the business model and everything's going to change, but they have this inherent go-getter, hustle, hunger, passion. You talked about Mary Baker. Mary Baker's been this wing for me. But I always say, like, one of the great gifts for people is to have somebody that's going to put their wing over them or put their arm around them and say, we're going to go on this journey and I'm going to help introduce you to the right people and help you get the right opportunities in front of them.
I love it, putting your wing over someone. And I love that you continue to do that, that you're not just enjoying the fruits of Mary's effort, you're actually returning it. I think that's awesome.
Thanks.
You had a little short stint in government.
Yeah.
You worked at the FBI. You're in that international training unit. Was there a moment when you worked in that unit that you saw the need for some of the teamwork and some of the things that you've been building today?
I have a lot of respect for the Bureau. Ever since I was young, that's really what I thought I wanted to do. And I was really honored and lucky to be recruited. Being in the international training unit, what a lot of people don't understand, they always go, the CIA is international and the FBI is local. And one of the better ways to understand is the CIA is preventative and the FBI is investigative. Something happens, the FBI is going to investigate it. When we were losing US citizens internationally due to terrorism or other international events, it was very difficult to investigate those crimes because we had come to a location that had had a terrorist attack. And unfortunately, things had been moved and there was no photographs and there was no real kind of process as there was in the United States to investigate something. And so one of the most beautiful things I've been part of is the experience of being able to teach the local law enforcement officials how to do this and really give them the tools and the mechanisms to be successful and see how nations could come together to try and create and build a better world together and be preventive. And it felt so empowering to do that. It wasn't just us coming in as Americans and being like, we're protecting the US citizens. We actually helped a lot of people and did it in such a collaborative, inclusive way. And it was just incredible. Judson Ray, who's my supervisor agent, he built the international training unit. And I was really honored to get a lot of insight and thought from him. But this was something that he had been so passionate about. It just kept continuing on, and really having that opportunity, I think, was one of the more amazing things when it came down to teamwork.
One of the things that fascinates me, I've spent a fair amount of time reading around the mindset of people who are uber successful in Silicon Valley, is this idea of looking at failure almost as a badge of honor.
Yep.
You kind of have to get your failure out of the way. You have to experience it in order to be able to ultimately succeed.
Yep.
How do you use failure to help you with your next?
Failure is extraordinarily hard, yet it's also the only way to really learn. I always say when I'm talking to young entrepreneurs when they start fundraising, it's a difficult experience because you fail a lot more than you succeed. You hear no a lot more than you hear yes. And sometimes those no's are really, really difficult. They're discouraging. Find a way to turn those into lessons and always look at them and go, if someone's going to say no, they're going to say no. Probe them and ask them why. What can you do to be better? Grab that knowledge, think about how you solve that problem, take that lesson of failure and be able to really morph it into why you're going to be successful. For me, I've made decisions in the past, or I've made the wrong moves, or I've been surrounded around the wrong people, or I've put the company in a place where it's not going to be successful, not just Censia in the past. Again, Censia is my fourth business. And so going through that and not necessarily going, oh, I failed, I'm going to walk away and quit, but rather, all right, what did I learn? What did I do wrong? And how do I make that so ingrained in how I move forward that I'm just improving and being better? The only way to learn how to walk is to fall. How we are as kids, and learning that is really key.
Exactly. I know that you have a deep relationship with YPO in the San Francisco Bay Area, but also on the West Coast. And one of my favorite things about YPO is how it really inspires the value of association. You're better when you have this collection of people around you who can push you, challenge you, actually even encourage you to learn something you wouldn't otherwise learn. How's that played out for you in your career?
That's a great question. YPO has been huge in my career. I don't know if I would have started Sensi if I didn't have YPO, because when you build a company, you put your whole heart and soul in it and you go all in and hope it works out. There's no backup plans. What YPO did was it surrounded me around other incredible leaders that lifted me up. When I would face a challenge, they shared their experience. They didn't give me advice, they shared their experience. If you bring up, having a really difficult situation with XYZ individual, or I'm not really sure, I need to think through this new talent that I need to bring in an organization, people are going to think through that. Or even personal life, professional life, it is all connected, whether it be a problem of health, or whether it be a problem in business, or whether it be a problem of selling a business or raising capital, or whatever it is. People can relate to that and they share their experiences. And when sharing experiences, what's pretty magical about that is that it isn't you should do, it is I did. And grabbing nuggets from a lot of people there allowed me to make decisions and pull little pieces of each of their experiences and go, oh, I should do that. That's really smart. Could be as small as how you manage your day, or as big as, should I take this company public? But then when things don't work out, what I was really moved by is I had these people around me that were so much more successful in anything I had ever dreamed of. And they're like, Joe, you're really good at this. You should do it again. That's really what motivated me to start Sensia and have the belief in myself yet again, the belief in myself when others believed in me. It was, wait a sec, I can do this. And it was coming from a place of true knowledge. They understood what it took and they're like, you've got what it takes. So just pick yourself up and keep going. That's what entrepreneurship is, and that's what life is. But having that group of people and those peers where there is no judgment, it is only experience sharing, and we're all on this journey together. And I didn't have to be so lonely.
More wings to wrap around you.
Exactly.
I love it. Joe, it has just been an honor. I love the opportunity to have just spent time learning from you today. These are my favorite kinds of interviews, just digging in and asking about the lessons learned and how we can apply them. But you were so open and willing to share with us on how to do that today. I can't thank you enough for being a guest and a corporate competitor.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really wonderful. I absolutely loved it. Could talk all day.
Joe just unloaded gold. It was so much fun. I loved her early discussion around what she learned studying entrepreneurs, what it was like to go sit with all these great leaders from around the world and try to look for common denominators. And the things she found wasn't degrees, it wasn't experiences, it was that they did not quit. They didn't possess the ability to quit, that they had a fire within them that allowed them to persevere and find success at the end of any dark tunnel. What a neat way to look at the common denominator amongst all of those she studied. I was also really taken by her discussion around finding rowing, and that it took her years to be able to do that, and that she had tried many other sports. I loved her line, right? It wasn't that I wasn't an athlete, it was just that I hadn't found my sport. What a great lesson there is in that for all of us, that if we're struggling in some way to maybe find our own passion around what we're doing, it might not be that we haven't found something about which we can be passionate. We just haven't found it yet. What a great point of encouragement. But then my greatest takeaway was her discussion about failure. She looked at failure as the only way to really learn. But if we experience it and walk away, it does us no good. After a no, she wants to go back and understand why the person she just talked to gave her that no. She uses that lesson to make her better. She was an amazing guest, and I hope you learned as much today as I did. And one last thing before you go. If you enjoy leadership conversations, I want to recommend another podcast to add to your queue. It is called, quite simply, The Leadership Podcast, hosted by Jan and Jim, who have become friends after I was a guest. They have more than 300 episodes to choose from, with guests including Daniel Pink, Margaret Heffernan, and Carole Robin. The Leadership Podcast stays true to its mission. We study leaders. So I encourage you to check out their show. I put a link to my episode in today's show notes. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir.
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.